In the previous videos, I've been talking about simple diffusion and osmosis, which are forms of passive transport, moving materials down their concentration gradient across the cell membrane. So now, what about when the cell wants to move materials against their concentration gradient? To do that, they must spend energy in the form of ATP, and this is referred to as active transport. For instance, if you notice here, the situation outside the cell is that the hydrogen ion concentration is greater than inside the cell, but the cell would like to remove these other protons, these remaining protons inside the cell membrane. And to do that requires a transport protein, which is going to use energy in the form of ATP to move a hydrogen ion against its concentration gradient, further increasing the concentration outside. Now, another form of active transport that really doesn't have anything to do with concentration gradients at all is called bulk transport. And this is when materials are moved in or out of the cell by vesicles. So for instance, here we have our cell membrane and the Golgi apparatus over here creating vesicles with various particles in them. Now this does require ATP, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. So suppose you have a vesicle, and inside are some materials like large molecules like hormones or enzymes. So cells, say in your intestines, that need to dump enzymes outside of them to digest food would move these enzymes to the outside through the formation of vesicles. Remember, vesicles have their own membrane. So in this form of bulk transport, we call exocytosis, the cell is moving materials out of the cell, thus the exo prefix on the word. So what I want you to see is how the plasma membrane of the vesicle itself merges with the plasma membrane of the cell membrane in order to dump those particles out. In another form of bulk transport, where the cell will move materials into the inside of the cell through the formation of vesicles, we call that endocytosis. And in this case, the particles of interest are either large food particles, sometimes other cells, like when white blood cells attack bacterial cells, or liquids in some instances. And you can see that it's just the reverse of the exocytosis process. Now, why does this process require ATP? Well, remember that these vesicles, whether they're moving from the cell membrane into the cell or from inside the cell to the cell membrane, that movement of vesicles is always powered by motor proteins traveling down the cytoskeleton. And of course, that process uses ATP.